Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 10, Episode number 9. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
On this episode, we're going back to a shop talk a few years ago and reprising our interview with Canada Goose President Carrie Baker. Steve, you and I visited separately the Canada Goose flagship store in Chicago, and it was clear, just by looking at the assortment, that a lot has happened since we talked with Carrie about this time in 2023.
Yeah, well, it was easy for me to visit the flagship because it was right in the lobby of the hotel I was staying in, so that was super convenient. But yeah, perfect. I think Canada Goose, and we'll talk as we go into the interview a little bit, kind of updating what's transpired since then. But to me, they're one of the most remarkable brands, and in this interview, Carrie, I think, just does a really excellent job of articulating what the brand is about, where their strategy is going. So aside from learning a lot about the history of the brand and what's going on with the business, I think there are a lot of great lessons. So yeah, as we segue to the interview, we'll just give a little bit of an update, but I think folks will find it interesting and get a lot out of it.
Now, speaking of shop talk, only about 13 sleeps, and we'll be together in Las Vegas once again. I reminded everyone your session is on Wednesday, March 26th at 2:25 p.m. Pivots, making bold changes with agility and flexibility. Save on registration using links in the show notes. Let's get right to the news. There's plenty of it, brought to you by our friends at Celonis, enabling process intelligence to make business processes work across systems, departments, and organizations. Try it for free at celonis.com. That's CELONIS.com. Well, what a week. We are recording this on Friday, so who the heck knows what is the latest in tariff news? I know the sentiment on this side of the border is summed up perhaps best by this response when Prime Minister Trudeau was asked yesterday what he thought of the wild, dynamic, flippy-floppy, predictable unpredictability of it all.
Foreign Affairs Minister yesterday called all of this a psychodrama. How do you characterize it?
Thursday.
That's right, Thursday. How is this landing from your perspective in our industry?
As we were talking off mic, I don't necessarily want to talk a ton about this, partially because it's very aggravating and confusing, and partially because, as you said, it's just constantly shifting. So whatever we say today might be quite different. But I've been kind of calling this Trump and the art of the stall, because we seem to keep gyrating between things that are definitely going to happen. In fact, I think it was Tuesday night, Trump's Commerce Secretary was being interviewed, where he said, look, we are not going to pause. We are definitely doing this. We are not open to a pause. There won't be a pause. And of course, 24 hours later, there was a pause. So it is just very difficult to figure out where this thing is going, what's going to happen next. But as we talked about last week, uncertainty is not good for the world at large, business in general, retail in particular. And I don't think that the pause really decreases fundamentally the uncertainty. It just kicks some things down the road. So we'll see. And probably worth mentioning a couple things timing-wise. It won't be very long before we will be talking about tariffs for the UK and the European Union. That's scheduled to be an early April thing. There are plenty of other countries that Trump was rumbling a little bit about, Japan and lumber or something. So we haven't talked about Japan yet. So who knows what's going on here. So I just think it's really unclear. But just a couple of other things that are not exactly tariff specific. There's just been this conversation of late about whether we are looking at a possible recession. We got some news. I think both the U.S. and Canada saw some news about job openings being reduced, job losses increasing. Now, 1 month does not a trend make. There are some anomalies in a lot of this data because of weather and these kinds of things. So, but I would say it's growing concern around the job market. We'll talk about earnings in a minute, so I'll save that. But I would say, generally speaking, that did not create any real optimism. I guess the other thing is interest rates. It's pretty clear that the Trump administration is trying to get interest rates down. The ECB Our friends over in Europe, they just lowered their interest rates. So U.S. has been kind of all over the place. Generally, Europe starting to come down. But the more we have this tariff discussion, the more inflation comes into play, which would tend to push interest rates up. So there's just a lot going on. The dollar weakening, blah, 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 blah. So it's such a mess, I would say right now. It's pretty hard to glean much other than stay tuned. And we'll go back to our buckle up buttercup kind of thing, because I think we're in for some turbulence here for hopefully not too long, but definitely the next month.
Well, all I can say, my friends, is stay tuned to the Remarkable Retail Podcast as we'll all try to figure this out together. All right, let's talk retail and let's make a deal. Walgreens goes private in a pretty huge deal.
Yeah, a couple of things in the news this week touch on some of my predictions, one of which was that we're going to see an escalation in deals. And there's some early evidence of this. I think we talked about this deal being rumored, speculated, or what have you, but it looks like it is going through. Sycamore Partners will be buying Walgreens, taking them private in about a $10 billion deal, which sounds like a lot of money, except when you realize that Walgreens at one point was worth $100 billion. So it's very much a company that has gone from being on top of the world in their own domain, master of their own domain, I guess one could say. I think that means something different, but I don't remember. But, not unexpected at this point. As we've talked about, going private doesn't necessarily give you some magical formula to turn the business around, but it will give them, take them out of the spotlight of the public markets, maybe give them some time to do some more radical things over the long term than they might have been able to do, or they have been able to do.
And Sycamore Partners, right? A well-respected firm, did a great job here in Canada with Staples, now trying to turn around what was Lowe's and is now Rona Hardware.
Good-sized firm, lots of experience in retail. So from a strategic partner standpoint, I would say that as opposed to kind of a pure financial player, they can add value to this deal, I would think.
Now, we are not going to spend any time on it in this episode, but we did talk off mic about keeping an eye on the 7-Eleven offer. Montreal-based Alimentation Couche-Tard still going after 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven just named a new American CEO to help them come out on top, whatever that means. So we'll be staying close to that. All right, let's talk about earnings. From my vantage point, a little bit of a mixed bag. Talk about what you're seeing.
Well, I'm not sure actually I would agree that it's a mixed bag. Well, first of all, it was a huge week for earnings. Like as I was going through my notes, there were probably 15 different major retailers we could have talked about. Listeners, you'll be happy to know we will not be talking about all of them. So I thought I'd go through this quickly and really try to talk about some of the themes we can glean from earnings. So the overall, pretty much across the board picture was most retailers reported a pretty solid fourth quarter. So these are everybody, November, December, January timeframe. Most beat expectations. In some cases, the expectations were low, so that wasn't super impressive. Others put up some pretty good numbers, so I'll mention that in a second. But also across the board, every single retailer warned that the rest of the year, and in particular the next quarter, they expected to be quite a bit worse. So this varied depending upon the retailer. So I'll touch on that quickly as I just hit 4 or 5 of these. So probably the biggest one was Target, which actually had 2 pieces of news. So they reported earnings for the holiday quarter, which were a little bit better than Wall Street expected, but they were pretty anemic. Sales and profits down a little bit. But as I said, if you have low expectations, maybe they're easy to beat. But the main thing is Target's performance continues to be much worse than its most direct competitor, being Walmart. But the other big piece of news, which I'll just give some quick commentary on, is they announced a new strategic growth strategy, I guess, or platform initiative, which is designed to add $15 billion to their revenues over the next 5 years. Now, that sounds like a lot of money, but it's only compounded growth of about 3% per year, which is kind of in line with the way you would expect the industry to grow overall. So one is, I don't think that's a particularly heroic goal, but it is much better than their performance over the last couple of years. So I guess you could look at that a number of different ways. But the elements, I call this like sort of meet the old boss, or meet the new boss, same as the old boss kind of strategy, because what they're articulating is a lot like their last strategy. And it's also kind of hard to understand what is so powerful about this. So just give a flavor for this. They're going to be leaning into more private brands. That's what they've been doing the last several years. More value. That's what they've been doing the last several years. Mm-hmm. A number of things that pretty much everybody is doing: growing marketplace, growing retail media networks, partnerships for more proprietary. So Warby Parker and Champion are the ones they highlighted. I think these sound like decent ideas. I don't think they're massive growth drivers. So a lot of this stuff looks like it's hard for me to work out how most of this stuff really gives them a competitive edge. It feels mostly like they're addressing known gaps and then adding the kinds of things that most retailers are doing. I might be not understanding it as completely as I need to. But the other big piece, which shows up, I guess, a fair amount of confidence, is they did re-articulate it, I guess, because they've talked about this previously, that they will be opening several hundred new stores. They will be putting quite a lot of capital to revitalize their stores. I think I've talked about this a month or so ago. Target, and there's a lot of executional issues that are going on, which I assume could be addressed with technology. Their stores look flat. I don't think they put enough into them. So this seems like a good idea. But again, it feels more like kind of table stakes as opposed to differentiators. So we'll see. But at this point, I'm skeptical that this is some big breakthrough. But and then just kind of quickly moving on to some of the other earnings, which were just really pure earnings announcements, no big strategic updates. Best Buy was the one I think that got caught up the most, at least from a stock price, because they got pummeled when they said they were, they said they had a pretty good quarter, improvement to trend, more or less flat, but they had been running decreases, so that was good. But they said they expect to take a big hit from tariff impacts because so much of their product comes from Mexico and China in particular. One of the companies we've talked about often over the past really year or two is Abercrombie and Fitch, because they have performed so well. Their stock has been on fire. They got caught up in this markdown action as well. They had a really good quarter, a slight reduction in trend, but when you compare it to just about every retailer we talk about, their total sales were up 9%, total comp increase of 14%. You rarely hear numbers like that. Double-digit growth in net income. The Abercrombie brand showed a little bit of weakness because they were only up just over 2%. But Hollister, which is actually quite a few more stores than the A&F nameplate, was up in the low teens. So really great quarter, but like everybody else, they said, we see the business slowing down in February. We expect the rest of the year to be difficult. So that sent their stock down. And then just another quick hits here. Nordstrom also reported it is their last quarter as a public company because they're going private.
Last we'll hear from them.
They had, I would say, a surprisingly good quarter. They've been also struggling to get the top line going, but they managed to report almost a 5% same-store increase. And their full-line stores had often been sort of the weak performer within the portfolio, but they were up over 5%. So good across the board performance online, Nordstrom Rack. So we were talking a little bit off mic. It's a little bit hard to explain, and we'll talk about Bloomingdale's in a second, this strength, because the trend had not been that great. And then all of a sudden, the fourth quarter looked pretty good. So whether it's better execution, whether it's doom spending, whether it's the Trump supporters feeling confident that, baby, we're back, so let's spend some money, I don't know. But they also struck a note of caution. So, big party for the fourth quarter, but now maybe not so much. The last three I'll just mention really quickly. They all kind of fall under the heading of turnarounds because they're all three brands going through transformation strategies. So the first is the Gap. They continue to show pretty good progress with some comp store sales growth, which had been lacking for a long time. Not a significant change. So people saying, oh, they're back. It's a turnaround success. I'm still not ready to declare victory, but it's definitely moving in the right direction. So congratulations to the team
Positive
there.
momentum.
Yeah.
Yep.
Foot Locker, kind of the same story. Rough performance for a while, but their new strategy seems to be gaining a little bit of traction. They had their first comp increase, though quite small, in a while. Some profit increase, so that's good. They are investing, upgrading several hundred stores, rolling out a new concept. So, yeah, the lace-up strategy. So, again, I would say too early to declare a victory, but definitely moving in a good direction. And then the last one, really kind of a similar story. Macy's reported, and they had a very significant improvement in profitability. So that's great. Not much to say about sales growth. The Macy's brand itself was actually down a tiny bit, but Bloomingdale's was up, as I said. So the high end seem to have had a good quarter generally. But again, warned that they expect the next several quarters to be quite tough. So they're actually forecasting sales decreases at Macy's. So that's not great when you're putting all this money, you're closing the bad stores, and you can't get any positive sales growth. So again, progress, but as I often say, better is not the same as good. So, as I step back, I look at this and say, it seemed like fourth quarter pretty strong for most of these brands. Definitely better performance on the profitability side, really, than the sales side for the most part, with a few exceptions. But everybody very, very nervous. And one of the things we talked about also off mic, keep in mind that anybody who reported earnings last week, they've already got 5 weeks of the current quarter, in the bag. Now, they have to be very careful because of SEC rules about exactly what they say. But when they speak about caution, it's not totally theoretical because they actually have 30-40% of the quarter. Yeah. They know what it looks like. And obviously that's not going to be the whole quarter. But if you've got poor momentum in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the month, that's a pretty good indicator that things are probably not going to massively turn around just because it's not, the weather improves or sunspots or something. So yeah, it's kind of a bleak picture for the near term anyway.
Can I take you back to Target for a minute or so on a different topic? This 40-day boycott that I keep hearing about with folks unhappy that they've rolled back DE&I initiatives. The shifting landscape around DE&I is front of mind for me as this week as I read the Women's Focus Conference launched by former Shop Talk executives, including Christina Gustafsson, former head of content for Shop Talk and Grocery Shop, who's been a guest on the show. It's been canceled. They wrote in an email that they had significant feedback from women. This is their quote: corporate leaders, speakers, and sponsors that as much as they want to support and attend Tribe 2025, simply no longer possible for them to do so. So first of all, what do you make of this boycott and its impact on Target, and overall the state of DE&I and how retailers might be thinking about it?
Well, the boycott, so the couple of things that are interesting about this. One is, folks probably would remember, Target had some struggles where folks on the other end of the spectrum were threatening a boycott of Target because of too much Pride merchandise, being too woke or whatever. And that did seem to have some short-term impact on their sales a while back. This group is actually targeting Target. That sounds funny, but going after Target because of their pullback from DE&I, and they're not being supportive enough of, in particular, the African-American Black community. So it's a 40-day boycott, and it's getting a lot of press. The group that's organizing it has influence. So I think it can be significant. First of all, I just think these culture wars are often not super helpful to humanity and in many cases to businesses in particular. But it's also like, well, how can you win, right? Like if you support diversity, you get hammered by one side. If you pull back on diversity, you get hammered by the other side. So I think it's a very difficult environment to navigate. And I think, unfortunately, really what it often means is that leaders end up being less courageous. They end up being more anodyne in what they do. And like it or not, particularly these big brands, they do have an influence on the culture and they can move forward in a positive direction. But depending what you consider to be positive, right? It's like we're so polarized that you end up just kind of going down the middle because you don't want to risk offending anybody. And for Target, this comes at a particularly precarious time because their business isn't good. So they're trying to mollify the extreme, I guess. I don't know. I personally don't think standing up for diversity is a particularly extreme point of view, but obviously some people see it that way. So it's just fraught with danger. So I do think it is. I don't think it's going to be a massive headwind for them, but I bet we'll end up hearing about it in their next quarter's earnings, because the boycott started after the current quarter.
Well, all right. That was the news brought to you by our friends at Salonis. So let's get to our interview with Carrie from Canada Goose. Let's spend a minute first on why we thought this interview and this brand was a great contender to update and reprise. I'm a big fan of the brand for a whole bunch of reasons. A brand and product largely created here in Canada. Their coats and accessories kept my wife and I nice and warm walking the cold streets of Chicago recently. They created an entire category, as Carrie describes, and continue to evolve the brand with line extensions and a new higher-end Snow Goose line. Talk about your impressions and what retailers can learn from Canada Goose.
Well, I think it's a good illustration of this idea of aim better and aim higher, of like really, really understanding your customer base and really bringing great product, service, experience, storytelling against that group. I mean, very clearly, Canada Goose is not for everybody. Some of that is by virtue of the price point. That excludes a lot of people. So I think in a world of abundance, unless you're the Walmart, Amazon, massive kind of retailer, most of the time what you have to do is really find your obsessive core customer and then really drill everything you're doing to create that remarkable experience for them. So Canada Goose, I think, is one of those brands that just does a beautiful job of that. Now, they've had some challenges because of their exposure to APAC and shifting wholesale dynamics and global warming. And, there's been a number of things that's made it difficult for them to grow. But just a little bit of an update on what's happened in the couple of years that we first talked to Carrie. They have expanded their store count pretty significantly. They're now up to 74 of their own stores. The other part of their direct-to-consumer business, e-commerce, has also grown quite nicely. Wholesale has been more flat. Some of that is by design, as they've been sharpening their focus there. Some of that is just the general weakness we've seen with department stores, wholesale around the globe. Their revenues are up about 50%. And as you say, they've been doing some things with category expansion. So even though I wouldn't say their business is like lighting it up in terms of stock return, shareholder returns and those kinds of things, I think strategically there's a lot to be learned from what they're doing. And when you have this kind of focus and you have this disciplined distribution, you could be real, even if you're not growing the top line all that much, you can be unbelievably profitable. So they've gotten their gross margins, even in a pretty promotional world, up to 74%. Lots of folks would love to have north of 50%, right? So that's impressive. And their operating margins are over 30%. So rather than chasing mass, chasing volume, this intense focus and going deep and bringing more things to the people that love you, that to me is the lesson. And she just does a great job articulating how they do that, what some of the challenges are, and where they're going. And they've largely gone where she talked about they would take the brand.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And one quick last shout out, if you want to see, I visited the store and we're doing now these virtual store tours. You can see the store itself. You don't have to imagine from our words, you can see a short glimpse on our YouTube page. So we'll put a link into that. We stopped into that great store in Chicago. All right. Without further ado,
I should also mention, just quickly mention, in the spirit of full disclosure, I do own a tiny amount of Canada Goose stock. It's quite small, but I am a fan of the brand, and I put a little bit of money where my mouth is. So I just want everybody to know that I do have a tiny, infinitesimally small, really, financial interest in. But that's not why we picked. That's not why we picked it.
Let's get to our interview. Carrie, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast here at Shop Talk in the Wise Line Podcasting Studio. That's a bit of a mouthful. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks so much for joining. I mean, I'm really looking forward to this. I've been a big fan of the brand for a long, long time. I wish we had a few more of the brand's items here on a somewhat colder
Today we need them.
This is the remote cold room.
Yeah, that's right. We got the cold room here. Maybe you could sponsor the podcast next year and just outfit
Absolutely.
the podcast. You can be a great outfitter.
Me and Mother Nature, we're close. I asked for this weather.
Yeah, sometimes we are blessed. Well, listen, let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and what you do for a living.
Sure. So, Carrie Baker, and I'm the president of Canada Goose, and I've been with the brand for now almost 11 years. And so I started, actually, Canada Goose was a client of mine. So I was on I came up through the communications world. Okay. And Danny, our current chairman and CEO, he was my client, and one day convinced me to come to the dark side, in-house. And it's been tremendous. It's been a rocket ship.
Yeah.
So 11 years. When I started, we were less than 100 million. I remember celebrating that milestone like it was the biggest thing we were ever going to see.
Yeah.
And last year we crossed $1 billion. So firmly established as a performance luxury brand, which is kind of a fun space to be in because there's not a lot of other brands there.
Yeah.
So,
well, more than a familiar name for many, but not everyone, and not everyone knows your scope and scale, and you've got stores around the world now. So give listeners a 411 about Canada Goose.
So Canada Goose, as I said, we're a performance luxury brand, and that's a space that we have carved out for ourselves. It's firmly fits in functional. You've seen our jackets. You're wearing our toque. You've seen what we do. We make products that work, but they're of the highest quality. They're made in Canada, high craftsmanship, high touch manufacturing, and that dictates a very luxury experience. And so we're kind of in the sweet spot that really there's not a lot of other players to be, and so we get to create our own story. And what does that matter? How does that show up? Whether it's retail, whether it's online, whether it's in a wholesale partner. So we've really taken that by the horns and really gone for it and turned it into something that nobody's really seen before. If you think about it, there's not a lot of Canadian luxury brands that are coming out of Canada, and that's a really unique space that we get to define.
Well, it's a unique space overall, whether it's coming out of Canada or not, right? And from the heritage of the blue jacket and the polar expeditions to the top movie sets around the world, and now you have a mix of wholesale and direct to consumer. So how many stores and how many countries?
So today we're going to end this year with 51 of our own stores. So that has been we opened our first store in 2016. So it's been, we're still very early in our journey, but it's been a fast journey on the DTC growth, and that is definitely key to our growth as a brand.
Right on.
So we have 51 stores around the permanent stores. Of course, we have pop-ups and temporary stores and activations. But you're right, we had a really interesting start of, being an authentic brand that probably only a handful of people in the north, airline pilots up in Nunavut, knew about, to then showing up on movie sets around the world.
So I've got some background in the luxury industry. I was at Neiman Marcus for many years, so I have some sense of kind of the magic and the storytelling of pulling together a luxury brand. You mentioned a performance luxury brand, so that is an interesting way to think about brand positioning. So can you just give us a little bit about how you think about all the ways you pull together this remarkable branding, the whole experience, just like what's the secret sauce to making it all work together, particularly now that you've moved out of that more niche category to not a broad market, but a broader market?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there isn't one thing. I think if there was just a playbook that every company would do that, lots of brands want to be luxury. But for us, it starts with product. You have to, no luxury company goes out there and just makes stuff. Yeah. And we take that to heart because we started in the performance and functional. We've never lost that. So even though, price points move up, even though our adjacencies change, even though the style might evolve, we make things that work. They're going to protect you in an environment, whether it's wind, rain, cold, snow. They have to work. And so that is something that we absolutely hold ourselves to, no matter how we grow, no matter what new category we get into. That is something that it's a promise that we will deliver to every customer every time.
And how do you, one thing that's sometimes, I don't know if you've heard this, but sometimes when we think about luxury brands or historically about branding, there's the sense of there's the functional part of it and then kind of everything else, and I'm exaggerating a little bit to make a point, but kind of everything else is image. The $50 handbag carries around stuff just as well as the $2,000 handbag, right? But because you bring in this performance dimension, does that change the way you think about marketing or the way you think about how you go to market?
It does, because and it goes back to our values. So one of our values is authenticity. So we know who we are. We know where we come from. We know why we exist. And I think that makes you make different choices, whether it's product, whether it's how you go to market, whether it's where you go to market. We're not trying to be something we're not. And so I think that is something that comes from the top. We talk about it all the time. We don't cut corners. We don't make cheap choices. Sure, you're going to get a T-shirt. Is it the best T-shirt in the world? It better be. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean it needs to reinvent the T-shirt category like we have with jackets or with footwear. Yeah. But it has to be high quality. It has to be made in the best place. It has to have the craftsmanship and the quality of material. So that is something that's just unwavering in our commitment.
Now, since you've been with the brand for a while and you've grown so much, from a leadership standpoint and a culture standpoint, has it been challenging to carry that culture through as you get more spread out and you just have, 10x the number of employees I imagine you had 5 or 6 years ago?
Absolutely. I wouldn't say it's a challenge. It's a focus for us, for sure. It comes from the top. Danny, our CEO, is very much about culture. He knows the business. It's his grandfather started this business. Right. He's done every part. Well, he hasn't been a sewer, but he's done almost every part of the company. But for him, it's all about, this must be a great place to work. And so, again, based on who he hires, the way we hire, the idea that, back to what I was saying about authenticity, we're not trying to be something else, but it is a big focus for us to make sure that we're developing, especially as we came out of the situation that we all came out of with pandemic. It was a conscious effort to make sure that we're bringing people in, they understand our values, they have an opportunity to live our values, even though we're all remote or separate. You might find different flavors in different countries or different markets, but at the baseline, a Canada Goose employee is very similar around the world, and there's something special and magical about that.
Well, I think also, I find sometimes cultures, they build on, when you have great success, it's fun to be part of such an exciting story and the growth and the innovation and all those kinds of things. I want to go back to, you were talking about your direct-to-consumer strategy, and there's been so much, I know you're just getting to the conference here, but it seems like over the last few years, but in particular already at Shop Talk, people are talking about, is D2C a business? Is it a channel? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I'm curious the evolution of getting more into your own stores, I assume really dialing up your online presence as well. Can you just kind of take us through that journey, how you're thinking about it going forward? And I guess the trade-offs between, it's not wholesale versus direct-to-consumer, right? So how do you think about that at Canada Goose?
The way we think about the channel, what are you going to call it, an ecosystem, channels, a business, we believe that they have distinct, meaningful, and complementary roles to play. So wholesale, obviously, as a manufacturer until 2014, and we only went through wholesale, and they helped build our brand. They were instrumental, and they still are today, and we see that being a very key part of our business. But as we are introducing online, we started in 2014 as an e-commerce business, then in 2016 added our first 2 stores, Toronto, New York, and then since then have obviously grown immensely. But you're right, there are trade-offs, but it's not one versus the other. It really is that complementary, and depending on the market that you're in, it may be different. Where is demand? Where's awareness? So obviously you can imagine a brand like Canada Goose has very high awareness in Canada. So the opportunity to grow DTC faster than in, say, EMEA or in Asia, where they didn't know us as well at the time, you have an opportunity that's different. So it might be just on a different time scale. Yeah. But I would say wholesale is always going to play a meaningful role for us. We need to know why we're with them. It can never just be a volume play. So either they're giving us geographic reach, or they're introducing us to a customer that we don't see through our own channels, or we haven't been able to attract yet, or they're giving us an opportunity and license to test a new product because they already have, for footwear, they already have people coming to shop for footwear. That gives us an understanding of what the customer is looking for, how can we play in that space. So we'll always be meaningful. It's just our focus, as most brands, I think especially in luxury, when you look at what the consumer wants, we want to be able to be available how and when and where the consumer wants. And so that's online. That's also omni-channel. I know we've been talking about that for years, but it really, it's table stakes, but we're just starting on that. And that, to me, so it doesn't really matter whether e-commerce is growing as fast as stores or vice versa. It's about how do we make sure that we're delivering on that experience that we want customers to have.
Sure, but it's also, I would imagine, it's a huge advantage to be able, coming out of a manufacturing origin, to have a direct relationship with the end consumer. You know, way back when I worked in manufacturing, and I would just say, casually talking about our customers, people would say, oh, you mean like consumers? Like, no, our customers are not the consumer. Like, we care about creating demand from the end consumer, but our customer are grocery stores or whatever it might be. So I imagine that's giving you data maybe that you don't have, in a different way of interacting with customers. That's quite powerful.
100%. It's powerful. And I think the one thing that we have been always lucky at, or not lucky, fortunate, I would say, is that even though as a wholesaler, or even as a manufacturer that sold only to wholesale, we did things that engaged the consumer, because we had to build the demand to show wholesalers that we were a brand that consumers wanted.
Right.
And so, I mean, I'm going back way, 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 way back. But, I mean, Danny, again, our CEO, he used to put seed people that were in cold places, so that when you walked, you know, if you were walking up to a hotel and the bellman everyone else was freezing and he's wearing a Canada Goose jacket, it builds demand in a different way. So we were fortunate that we always understood our customer is the consumer. And so that we built it that way. And of course, it gives us lots of data and understanding what they're buying, how they're buying, what they want to see next from us. Yeah. Where do we have permission to play? But it also, I think the one thing, especially in luxury, is we know our story best. So you might have the best wholesale partner in the world, and they're doing a great job, but they're not going to carry your full assortment. They're not going to present it in exactly the right way for us, because they're looking at their customer. Yeah. So for us, we're trying to redefine or define a different type of luxury, and we think that we're the best at that. So that's why there's interest in building out our stores. And when you come to a Canada Goose store, it's a very different experience than finding us at Nordstrom or another one of our partners.
Harry Rosen or wherever.
Right, exactly.
I was showing you before we got on mic that I love to feature your cold rooms often in my keynotes, because I think and the reason I do it, I mean, I just love it. I think it's a cool idea, but I love it for two reasons. One is, to me, I talk about remarkable retail, which is literally something, that's distinctive, relevant, and people talk about it. So it's one of those things that I think just creates a lot of buzz and, virality or whatever, good for the gram, etc. But the reason I, in particular, include it is because it's also a real great way of demonstrating the value of the product. It's not just a gimmick. It's a very tangible thing. So I'm curious, just in general, the process for innovation at Canada Goose, but in particular, if you were willing to share how that idea came about and what it's meant for you.
Yes, I love it. So cold rooms and snow rooms now, we have some that produce snow overnight, and people, that people are coming from climates and environments where they've never touched and seen snow. So to come into one of our rooms and to have that experience, you're right. Yes, it's good for the gram. They have some fun. They take some pictures, but that is a memorable experience that you're not getting at other, especially not luxury. Yeah. Typical traditional luxury can be very cold, very austere and pompous, whereas we are the opposite. We want it to be inclusive, although we want to be exclusive as a brand, but it's not exclusionary.
Exclusively? No.
Inclusively exclusive.
There we go. Yeah. I like that.
So we want people to come in. We invite them into our store. You're greeted warmly when you come into the door, even if you have to wait. God forbid you have to wait at one of our doors to get in. You're going to be greeted by somebody. They're going to ask you what you're here for. They're going to set that all up, and then they're going to walk you through the store. You're going to see the Inuit art collection that we have. You're going to be invited into a cold room.
Or the heritage jackets up on the wall or whatever.
That's right. Storytelling, because we're an experiential storytelling brand. And so back to the idea was that we used to do, as I said, I came from the communications world, and so we used to do these events where you'd get to test and get to try, whether it was a rain room. So it really was an authentic way to bring it into the brand for anybody, whether it was a reporter, whether it was an investor, to, again, touch and feel. That is a very powerful experience when if you've never been truly warm and you put on a Canada Goose heavyweight down jacket, like that blows your mind. Yeah. Really, and so we wanted to have that aha feeling, that moment as we went into the retail and do it in, you're right, not a gimmicky way, not in a, schlocky way. We wanted to do something that was real. People make decisions based on how they feel in that room. They're standing in there, whether it's footwear, whether it's a knitwear, now it's a jacket. They have so many choices, but they get to make that choice and leave the store feeling very confident in their purchase.
I wanted to tap into your communications background. I'm going off script here a little bit. So I spent a bunch of time at Hudson's Bay Company.
Yeah.
And we used to think a lot about the connection between Brand Canada and Hudson's Bay because they were very closely aligned. So how do you think about that? I mean, can't Brand Canada, different parts of the world, trades higher or lower on any given day? You both benefit from all the associations with Canada, cold, and they know how to handle the cold. But at the same time, there is potentially some downside in being so closely named. How do you think about that?
It's been, we talk a lot about it. It's been by far and large a positive thing for us. I think there's also, it's not just the cold, it's the idea of the Canadians. So forget the country and the environment, which is natural and everyone gets that, but it's also the warmth of Canadians, the personality, the welcoming nature of Canadians. And so that reputation around the world has by far and large been positive. Sure, you're always looking at it going, okay, is this going to be an upside or a downside? Yeah, but again, generally the people forget the politics and all that. But generally people understand that they've never met a Canadian that they didn't like, so it's been pretty good. I mean,
Steve, is that true?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say anything on mic.
You might say something different after today.
Yeah, that's right. Off mic, we'll chat.
No, but I think the other part of that is because it's not just Canada Goose as in the name, it's made in Canada, right? That is
you're deeply entrenched into that.
It's deeply entrenched, and people
brand.
Understand, especially it's interesting, where people understood the value of made in Canada was not Canada first. It's externally. So we would be going to trade shows in Europe where people understood, so they think of the Great White North, they think about Canadians, craftsmanship, of course they know cold. So the idea that this jacket would be made in Canada, Beautiful. They've instantly got it.
Not to be too much of a digression, but don't you think there's also a point where people don't take brands so literally? Like I always say, Pottery Barn.
Right.
Sells neither pottery
nor barns.
Nor in a barn. It's not in a barn. Crate and Barrel. There's names that you may know there's an origin as to why they were originally called that made some sense. But over time, I've said this to people and they're like, I've never thought about that. Or Banana Republic, there are lots of these names where the literal name not only isn't relevant, but it actually doesn't make any sense.
They're not trying to find meaning in it.
Yeah, but clearly they've established brands that people understand and you like or you don't like, but they're powerful brands. So I do think there's a point at which you become so powerful that it is the overall experience, and nobody's sitting there to say, well, Canada yes or Canada no.
No, exactly. And especially when you think about geographically, as we've grown, I don't think people are walking into a store in Nanjing and thinking, oh, Canada, right? It's just they know Canada Goose, the brand, and they have certain associations and they fall in love with a product or our experience, but they're not actually thinking.
Right, but then for the people that spend the time to think about it, it makes perfect sense, and there's a lot to leverage,
Absolutely.
Let me flip that narrative or flip the script a little bit. So off mic, I was saying I had the pleasure of being on a panel with Harris from your team, and we didn't talk about it too much on that panel, but we were thinking about counterfeit product and how do you authenticate product. Talk a little bit about that, because the downside of being so popular is that people start to kind of try to knock the product off. And I know from the past you spend a lot of time and mental energy protecting your IP. So just share a little bit of that for us.
We do, and I think it's one of the times when imitation is not the greatest form of flattery. We do. We take it very seriously, and I think that's no matter what brand, but particularly brand is everything in your experience. And so if people are seeing, fakes out there, and it just starts to erode at the brand. And so we do a lot of education with the consumer to say this is a fake. This is, you can go on our website, either slide, there's tools, there's verification tools. So we want people to have confidence in what they're buying and know the signs of what that is. And then we also spend an inordinate amount of time working with government officials, training. Just training them. Also, it's education, but training them on when they're seeing labels come from China to Canada. No, we ship from Canada to China or vice versa. So it's something we do. We want to make sure that we're protecting. Lots of brands do it. I think the thing for us is that you have to watch it, but you could go broke trying to protect it.
Chase every
right?
single
And
one,
so you
right?
have to be strategic with it. What are the points of entry? But
Right.
we spend a lot of time, significant time.
I mean, there's some practical, like if it's a $100 Canada Goose jacket online, it's probably not.
It's not the real
not
thing.
the real
authentic,
thing. Too
yes.
good to believe.
No,
but-
and that's part of our education too, right? To be talking about, we don't go on sale. If you're seeing a Canada Goose website that looks exactly like ours, but there's big price discounts, and that is not
That's
a Canada
not us.
Goose. And so it's that education
Yeah.
in different markets that we go to that we try and make sure that people understand what they're buying.
Let's talk about a new initiative you've launched, which is the resell market. So tell us about that. Why now? Is there a momentum that you perceived? I'm sure you're very customer focused. I'm sure customers have been asking for it.
Absolutely.
So talk about that.
I'm very excited. Thank you for asking because it's my favorite thing. CG Generations. So Canada Goose Generations, we launched at the end of January with just online in the U.S. market. And so that's our chance to really live our purpose. And yes, of course, it's a sustainable way to give access to people and unlock some new product, not new to them products that, we are very exclusive. You can't get our products everywhere. And so for them to find a special piece and only have one of one, it's exciting. I think why now? We've been watching the market for a while, watching what people are doing, whether looking at third parties, the Vestiaires, the Real Reals of the world.
Sure.
And I think, again, back to the idea that it's a way for us to engage and present the best story versus somebody else doing it. So often we get questions on, why didn't you just go through somebody else? I think for us, it's powerful to have that whole ecosystem, to be able to engage with people, to understand why they're buying refurbished goods. And I think you'll see, I'm not speaking... I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's also a very heavy Gen Z. They care about those things. They care about thrifting. They care about not adding new, quote unquote, waste to the environment. And so for them to be seeing us and finding something that's great, that of value, maybe at a little bit of lower price point, that's not why we're doing it, but
Sure.
for them it's a little more accessible and it just speaks to their values. And so I think that's a huge part for us of why now. So I'm really excited. I think this can be very powerful tool, how to engage with them differently, seeing how customers are buying. I think lots of people don't know what the end state is going to look like, but you have to try. And
it's such an interesting initiative, and I'll pass the mic back to Steve in a second. But I mean, for years I was like, I want you guys to tell me which dry cleaners are authorized to dry clean my jacket. And finally you posted that.
Yes.
And now, my jacket, which is probably 10 years old now, looks brand new, right?
Yeah.
So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. It's just for you.
It might be time for a new one, though, Michael, I think.
Well, maybe, but
Well, this is it's very interesting, and this is both the power, but the interesting part about a resale is like our jackets are products, but particularly our heavyweight down jackets, they're made for a lifetime. They come with a very powerful warranty. And so it's not like you need a new one because it stopped functioning or it stops looking good. But it's the opportunity to get into something new, to maybe try a different color, a different pattern without sort of starting from scratch. But I could talk about it for a long time because I'm really excited about it.
So that makes me think one other question before we start to wrap up is what is the role of fashion? I was just thinking about, when you sell such durable investment quality, however you want to think about that, that's awesome from the customer standpoint, and there's lots of great things about it. But at the same time, getting that frequency. So do you think about fashion as a way to do that? Do you think about product line extensions as a way to do it? Like what's that next tier of growth, I guess?
It's not, we would never say fashion. We're definitely not a fashion company. We don't do fashion shows. We don't have new collection that you say, oh, here's the spring summer collection.
Right.
And I think it's obviously purposeful, but it's very powerful for us to have a business model where lots of your product, 70% of our products, carry over season after season. How we think about newness is, of course, we want to add freshness. We want to give people a reason to come back in store, come back online. Yeah. Colors, prints. When you look at some of our iconic pieces or heritage pieces that have been around for a long time, we'll work with a collaborative partner and we'll launch a new version of it. It's still the same jacket. We're not reinventing the wheel, but it's got a crazy print.
What you did with the Inuit collection.
That's a little bit different with Adagi. Project Adagi.
Yeah.
But This is more on the collabs front. Addigy is a way to bring people in from a different angle and a different reason. I love that project. It was one of the things we launched a couple of years ago, and it's so near and dear to my heart. But so newness, we definitely think about freshness, but category extensions, absolutely. That's a key part of our growth strategy for the next 5 years is introducing new categories faster. So our first category that we launched in 2012, 2013 was lightweight down. And that is now a very meaningful part of our business. And now as we've introduced knitwear, apparel, footwear,
rain jackets,
rain jackets, wind jackets. And so that's because people love our brand and they know that what we're going to make is going to work for them.
Right.
They ask us, and we listen to them a lot of, okay, you kept my body warm. How about my feet?
Right.
I know you guys will deliver on warmth. So that's also a way for us to extend and bring people back into the
Sure.
Back
Makes a
fold.
ton of sense. Plenty of exciting things going on, obviously. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you
Canada
both.
Goose has been, I love talking about the brand because I think it's one of those brands, from my perspective, that just really knows, and you've said this, who you're about, who the product is for, what makes you remarkable, and you've got that discipline, but at the same time willing to push the edges a little bit as well. So thanks so much, Carrie, for joining us. Hope
Thank
you
you
have
for
a
having
great
me.
rest of Shop Talk, and we'll see you out in the world.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 10 are available each and every Tuesday, so be sure and tell all your friends in the retail industry all about us. And make sure and visit our newly refreshed YouTube channel for exclusive video and our new virtual store tours. If you liked our episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategic advisor, keynote speaker, and best-selling author of 2 books, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, and Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant and advisor, keynote speaker, and media entrepreneur. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.